もしやコスモでは。
Cosmo needs me free.
Cosmo AP Luxury Sports.
Well, based on the not so subtle hint at the end of last episode, you've probably guessed by now that what I'm going to be doing this time is installing a vintage air HVAC system. Now, of course, there is a ton of stuff involved in this, so I think first I'll just go over what I'm going to be installing on the bench before I get down to actually, installing it. The core of the system is the Compac Gen 2 HVAC unit with defrost option. And that comes in a kit with a bunch of stuff, including defrost ducts, which I probably won't use, some drain tube, mounting brackets, a coolant solenoid valve for the heater core, wiring harness, and some 2.5 inch and 2 inch ducting. That's just the basic kit of parts, but of course that alone doesn't complete the system. I also ordered a selection of plastic duct lines and fittings, a 20 inch by 12 inch condenser, which is the largest I can fit in the available area at the front of the car, a selection of hard lines, a complete hose kit with a fairly decent selection of fittings, a receiver dryer with trinary switch, and I think that's everything. Oh yes, a horizontal control panel, which should fit pretty well into the stock Cosmo dash, and finally, a set of adapter fittings that will let me use a standard RX-7 SD7 AC compressor with the vintage air hose and line kit. From the parts store, I picked up a Sandin SD708 compressor as found on the 2nd Gen RX-7. To use that compressor from Vintage Air, I ordered a set of adapters, and these bolt on to the compressor inlets and outlets, sealing with the O-ring, which allow me to use the standard fittings. The 2nd Gen RX-7 AC compressor has one major advantage to the less expensive, more generic compressors that Vintage Air sells. And that advantage is, by using a 2nd Gen RX-7 power steering / AC bracket, the compressor bolts right up. Zero issues at all clearing the frame rail. I can use the stock RX-7 tensioner pulley, and quite likely I can just bolt in a stock RX-7 power steering pump. Thanks Mazda for not changing the front accessory mounting locations since sometime in the early 70s. As I mentioned, the condenser measures 12 inches high by 20 inches wide. And I picked it basically because, well, it was the largest condenser I could fit up here. I think I'll mount it about here, which isn't quite square in the opening, but it leaves plenty of room on this side for fittings. And it should be really easy to mount, actually, just by making some tabs and bolting it on. All right. If only I was smart enough to drill these holes before I cut these things out on the bandsaw. Could have used the drill press. Now, with the brackets bolted on, I can just line it up where I want it in the front of the car. Get it reasonably good vertically. go. Real trick, of course, is holding this in place to get a few tacks. Wow, that actually wasn't too awful. It looks pretty straight. No, tune higher boost next season. Enjoy it the way it is for now. Well, we'll put down the 400 horsepower runs. Okay, condenser is bolted in place. Time for the receiver dryer. Now, to avoid creating a clearance problem in the location of the receiver dryer, I'm going to install the trinary switch first. These things, I guess, are filled with desiccant, and you can hear sealed and apparently pressurized to keep out the moisture. So, I don't want to expose this thing to the atmosphere for too long. Okay, I don't know where that went, but luckily the trinary switch comes with a new O-ring. Lube this up with a little bit of compressor oil. Lubed. Guess I should probably put a little bit of oil on the threads. Mating surface. And just snug her down. Okay, now I can figure out the position of this thing in the car without worrying that I won't leave enough space for the trinary switch. I considered mounting it here in front of the condenser like a lot of OEMs do. It would make the plumbing really easy, but I want to reserve this area for the intercooler. Instead, I decided to tuck it in right underneath the headlights. So what I'll do is I'll make a small mounting bracket using this piece of aluminum, kind of like that, to which the receiver dryer can mount to. Now the bracket will bolt to a stock capture nut and the nut that I just welded on. And I'm using Allen head bolts simply because then I don't have to hog out a huge hole right here to fit a socket. Now if we can just awkwardly get that place. I'll mount the dryer to the far side of the bracket so I can leave plenty of room for the hard line that will come off of it. And nice and high up, call it right here, so that the other line can snake underneath and follow the frame rail. And 2 M6 nutserts will provide the threads for the dryer to mount to. Nice and solid. Seems to fit well. And as a bonus, it still even fits the car. Now, it may look like it's going to interfere with the headlights here, but it doesn't. I've already checked. The headlights are actually far enough out that only the plug is going to come close to the dryer. The main unit, which houses the evaporator, heater core, blower, and all the air control valves, looks like a pretty big item to shove up under this dash, but before I ordered it, I did measure it, so I'm fairly sure it fits. At least, it should fit, and yes, indeed it does. Now, the limiting factor here is not the dash at all. It's actually the transmission tunnel where it meets the firewall. So I have plenty of room between the dash and the unit. So to make things easier, I'll pull the dash out, and then I can work with this right at the firewall. This is about where the unit's going to fit, and I have two interferences. The first one is the evaporator drain nipple, which is hitting the transmission tunnel. So I'll have to cut a little area out, which I would have had to do anyway in order to run the drain hose down to the exterior of the car. And these stock heater core studs, which I'll have to cut off so I can get a little bit more clearance. Well, that little bit of clearancing made all the difference. It's now far more of a hot dog in a hallway situation, and it looks like my front brackets are just going to be as easy as simple straps. One of the brackets in the kit looks like it'll work with just a few modifications. Cut it here, flip it around, and then nutsert it into the cowl there. Wow. I made a little spacer out of some 3/16 aluminum just to give me a little bit more room between the bracket and the vent outlet so that I can fit my hose. Now just mark the top hole so I can drill through the dash and put in a nutsert. And I'll just install a nutsert so I have somewhere to actually bolt the thing to. I drilled my hole a little bit larger than it should have been. For the passenger side, I just made the exact same bracket and put in the exact same nutsert. So it should just kind of slide into place, held in by the two front brackets. Once I actually get them lined up. Okay, that's reasonably even. The next, I guess, is this oddly shaped rear bracket. And it's oddly shaped because it has to engage two holes on the evaporator. I kind of regret cutting those studs off because, as it turns out, I kind of plan to use them to hold these flanges on, which will become part of the bracket for the rear of the evaporator unit. The bracket on the rear is just going to be a little bit more beefy because I decided that I want the rear bracket to have a bit more strength. Because just on the front stem brackets alone, the evaporator wiggles around a lot more than I'd like. The cut down rear bracket is installed, so once again the evaporator goes back into place. Now there was absolutely zero chance of being able to film the tack welding that took place behind the evaporator core, but this is what I came up with for the rear bracket. It just needs to go onto the bench to be welded and a little bit of trimming. I've spent far too much time working out the mounting bracket arrangement for the evaporator, so I got a lodge complaint. All the vintage air stuff until this point has fit very easily, but the mounting arrangement that they have provided on this evaporator core makes about as much sense as the Michael Jackson Memorial Daycare Center. There are two mounting holes on the front, which are great, but then on the unit there are no other mounting holes except for one on the top here and one on the rear here. Seriously? It's made making brackets for this thing 10 times more complicated than it needed to be, and it's still not going to be mounted perfectly solid, so there's going to be some movement. This is a universal fit part vintage air, so there should be mounting holes here and 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 everywhere there possibly could be, so that it can be easily mounted to as many different configurations of car as the user wants. Fully welded bracket, back in the car. After sleeping on it a few nights, I'm just not happy with how solidly the evaporator is mounted, so I'm going to add one more bracket to the one area of the thing that I can actually drill a hole and add a nutsert. So we'll start this bracket by just welding a piece of angle iron with a pre-drilled bolt through some rod. The bracket just bolts to an existing stud on the firewall, and what I will do is weld another piece of angle right about there. If I can get these on here. Perfect. Gotta sharpen my bit. it's kind of a long stud. Funny, you'd think I'd be used to such a long stud. That really came out wrong, didn't it? Did not have the humorous result which I had intended. Brackets locked back into place, and awkwardly failing sexual innuendo to the side, I'll just mark a spot for the bolt hole. This is the one piece of the evaporator unit that I can safely drill into, because it's just a cover and there's no chance of hitting the evaporator or heater core if it's removed from the unit. And a nutsert will provide the threads. Not too bad, first one I've ever done into plastic. And finally, bolt in the new retaining hole bracket. Oh yeah, now she's about 1,000 times more solid. I can't forget about the evaporator drain. My measurements say it sticks out about 2 centimeters. And that should close off the drain hole pretty nicely. Evaporator back into place again, so let's move on. Now that the major components are in place, we can move into the plumbing. Remember the adapter fittings that I got to fit the sand and O-ring flange to the Vintage-Air hose fittings? Well, you know what I say about universal parts, is that they're universally wrong for every application. The adapter blocks fit the compressor just fine. But the problem is, well, one fits, they don't fit together. I spent kind of a lot of time thinking how I would modify them to fit. I considered cutting the ears off them, welding them together, and then re-drilling the hole, which I didn't like because I'd probably warp them and they wouldn't seal. I thought of kind of sticking them on like this, putting a bolt down with a plate over both of them to clamp, but again, it's not really an idea that thrilled me. And then, as I was just randomly moving these things around, I ran into the solution. I noticed that the bolt hole on the flange of each adapter lines up to the bolt hole in the compressor, understandably, since they're designed to fit a Sandin compressor. And then realized that all I have to do, if you can picture this, is cut half of the flange off of each adapter so that they can sit with each adapter being secured halfway by the bolt, and then just make a little plate / washer to go on the top between the bolt and the adapters to equalize the clamping force. Should just be that simple. The mounting bolt just barely doesn't fit, so I have to very carefully ream this hole out. As happens many times in life, it now fits after a little bit of hole reaming. Okay, that looks close enough. Mark that to divide it in half. Not bad. Wow, that's a little nerve-wracking. When machining the old-fashioned way by hand, always do the last bit with a file. Okay, so you can see now what I'm basically going for. The bolt will clamp down on the half of each of these cutouts. This obviously is the other one. I'm just working on the final filing to get it to fit. The process is to just file it until I can slip the bolt straight up out, which means that I'm at exactly half a circle, as there won't be any overhang to grip it. Almost there. Well, that seems to work quite well, and they seem to clamp down evenly. To make sort of a flat plate / washer, which I'll use to enhance the clamping of the adapters, I'm just using the little protection plate that came with the compressor as a template. It's kind of the perfect shape. Wow, it even fits. Finally, here's how it all goes together. O-rings go in the grooves, adapters sit on the compressor, washer plate on the adapters, and finally the bolt which clamps it all into place. Everything is clamped down tight and sits flush, so that should be reliable for years to come. With all of the major mechanical components installed, I think at this point it's a good time to end episode 29. It's been a little while since I released a video, and there is actually a considerable amount of work still left to do on the system. So, you can join me for episode 30, which will be part 2 of the vintage air installation, where we will plumb the system, wire it up, and install all the underdash air ducting.